Welcome to Story in a Bottle. I'm your host, Dan Maccarone. Each episode, our guests are leading voices in tech, media, and entertainment. And to get to know them better, we share their favorite cocktails as they share their stories.
Women's health is arguably the biggest issue journalists need to cover these days. And Susan Rinkunas has dedicated her career to educating us about what we need to know. Over Michter's Old Fashions, she walks through her experience starting her career at Runner's World magazine, how that evolved into roles at Women's Health, Health magazine, and eventually as health editor at The Cut. Today, she's freelancing at Jezebel and other publications, ensuring the truth about all aspects of reproductive rights and all aspects of women's health are available wherever possible. Well, cheers. Thanks for coming on this.
Thanks for inviting me.
So nice to meet you.
Sick.
How long have you been in New York?
13 years this summer.
Okay.
I moved in 2011, July.
And where did you move from?
Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Allentown, I love Allentown.
How do you know Allentown?
I used to go camping there as a kid. We would drive like 7 hours from just outside of Boston, where I grew up, and me and my many brothers and sisters would go in 2 cars, and get with my parents, and we'd spend like 4 or 5 days camping in like Allentown and the surrounding areas. But anyways, I was just curious because I always love to know how people end up in this fine city that we're in.
Yeah.
But so you're a journalist and you're currently kind of freelancing, is that right?
Yes.
How are you finding the freelance world?
Well, I was freelance before in 2020 because I have worked at multiple really messed up media companies. The last one that was owned by private equity, funded a lot by private equity and laid me off was Vice Media, which, if you're aware, went through bankruptcy and then just got purchased out of bankruptcy and then laid off almost everyone on the digital team. And they're going to pivot to, I don't know what. I have no idea. But so I freelanced once before, and that was an interesting time because it was May 2020 to about October 2021. And we could tell that things were shifting in the abortion space. There were cases working through the court system. And then also in September 2020, RBG died.
Right.
And then Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed really, really quickly. So I think as someone on this beat, myself and other people knew as soon as she died that meant Roe v. Wade was going to get overturned. It was just a matter of how quickly. So you're pitching stories and you're trying to get editors to take your stories on all these things. And it was a little bit harder than it is now for me to get stories picked up because it's already gone. Roe's already gone. The horrors persist every day and every week. But then also in between, I did work at Jezebel for almost 2 years and then got a little bit more of a name for myself as a writer because I had mostly been an editor. I had done some writing, including at The Cut. But it's easy for me to get work now. It's just on a freelance basis. Yeah. I feel like I have enough work right now to have a full-time job, but I am freelancing.
That's the dream freelance situation is,
Yeah, it's so far so good. And I'm a contributing writer at Jezebel and then freelancing somewhat regularly for other places. But yes, I'm busy enough to not be, walking dogs or waiting tables. But I'm still having to pay for my own health insurance. So
that does not sound great. That sounds like the big negative part of the of that. Well, so by the way, we're drinking Michter's bourbon, old fashions. By the way, it's what a great journalism drink is on old fashioned. I feel like it's something I've been in New York now for 26 years almost, and I know, and spent a lot of time in the world of media. And early on in my career, I was like working at the Times and we'd go out for drinks after, 5 o'clock. We'd leave the newsroom and go, and whiskey drinks were like the go-to for when I know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like old fashions. I do not like rye. You asked me if I wanted it with rye and that's disgusting. But
to each their own.
Yeah.
No judgment.
I think a lot of people will be drinking beer in journalism because it's like cheaper than
I think sometimes just to make the pain go away.
Oh, okay. Well, that too. Yes. Or like whiskey shots. But this is, I like.
How is it, by the way?
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Want to make sure. Because we didn't have, I know you were looking for bullet. We didn't have bullet. So,
No, it's good.
We have to accommodate. But is that, so you mentioned that you have 2 go-to drinks. We're going to get back to the journalism in a minute. But, the important part of the opening part of this podcast is obviously understanding people's drink of choice. So this or tequila, soda, pineapple.
Yes.
What is it that makes you gravitate towards those very different?
Those are so different. Well, normally I wouldn't be drinking an old fashioned in April, but it's we're not outside. I didn't know if it was going to be hot in here. It's it's a decent temperature. If it were hot in here, I would not want to drink this. I would have gotten tequila.
No, that would have been
soda
awful.
pineapple.
Yeah.
This is more of a wintry drink for me. And then tequila soda pineapple. I like tequila, but a tequila soda tastes disgusting to me. I like a mixed drink. I like I actually really like spicy margaritas.
Ooh, wow,
but if you're at a bar and it's crowded and you're not going to be that asshole who's like, yeah, can you make me a spicy margarita? It's really easy to just order that at the bar, and then I feel like I'm drinking a tequila drink and it doesn't taste like paint thinner.
Yeah, no, totally. That makes well, so you have been freelancing before they worked at Jezebel, and it's a theme on this show. We've talked to so many people from the old Gawker suite of publications over the years. And I feel like now it's funny because we just talked to Lauren a few weeks ago. We were talking to you. Like, what was your experience at Jezebel like coming into it? I mean, off mic, you mentioned, I came into this experience eyes wide open from a management standpoint, but also it is still Jezebel.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So when I was in my last freelance period after getting laid off by Vice, I was looking to have a staff writing job on this beat of abortion and politics, heavy emphasis on abortion. And it's just really hard to find. And Jezebel had a job open up. And I had read Jezebel for years, and I had seen what happened after GeoMedia became the owners. They bought the sites from Univision after Gawker folded in, the bankruptcy trial.
Right.
Funded by Peter Thiel, all that stuff, whatever. So I knew what they did to Deadspin. I knew what happened there. I knew
for people who don't know what Deadspin, what
okay.
did they do?
April 2019 is when GeoMedia, which is a company. It's a company that barely exists. It's just it's Great Hill Partners is this private equity firm based in Boston, and they are the backers of GeoMedia. I believe actually Jim Spanfeld also has a personal stake at GeoMedia. So they bought those whatever it was at the time, 10, 12 websites from Univision. And so back to Deadspin, Deadspin was known as much for its sports coverage as it was for its politics coverage. They had a whole section of the website called the concourse, which is, that's the part of the ballpark or whatever where you're getting food, mingling, chatting, whatever. That's where they would write their politics stuff. And some of those stories outperformed the sports stories by leaps and bounds. Okay.
Sure.
And David Roth is one of the most well-known politics writers at formerly at Deadspin, now at Defector, who would be writing a lot about Trump and politics and all this stuff. So, but Jim didn't like that, and I wasn't there at the time, so I don't know if it's because the stories didn't go along with his personal politics, or if he thought it was going to be bad for advertisers or what have you. But he basically issued a mandate of stick to sports, and the EIC quit as a result of that mandate. Her name was Megan Greenwell at the time, and then they promoted somebody to be acting, Barry, and he got fired for not sticking to sports. And then and I believe he was still a member of the union. Yes, he was a member of the union. And for them firing him for that reason, the rest of the staff quit in protest. And then they eventually launched Defector, which is by all accounts doing incredibly well. And they're a co-op model, all that stuff. So you could Deadspin was dormant for a few months, and Jim did that to himself. He nuked the brand credibility. He had it. I don't know that he expected all those people to quit, but they tried to hire freelancers to work on it. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
They hired freelancers in the interim, and I guess some of these people didn't know what had happened, and then everyone was calling them a scab in their mentions because they were basically a union action had occurred. Somebody got fired in violation of the contract, and then people quit in protest.
Sure.
And so it was. You can debate whether or not it was really scabbing, but it's people coming in doing freelance work at what was a unionized shop, and so that's what that was.
But I think the other thing that's really interesting about it is that the media world is so small, right?
Yeah.
Everyone knows, if they don't know each other, they know of each other. So to quit a job where you're walking away from, a bunch of brands, bunch of people, could be career, maybe not suicide, but certainly put your career on layaway for a little bit. And it's such a bold thing to do, but also shows how much they didn't respect
Absolutely
the Geo way of doing media, let's say. And I'm not saying that they're wrong about that, because I don't think they're wrong. I think that was the right thing to do. But it speaks to me of a greater issue of around editorial control, of understanding the cultural zeitgeist, which those suites of brands were always the best at. or one of the best at.
Yeah.
And I mean, thinking about going to Jezebel to talk about abortion in 2021, 2022, when everything started there, like that's such a ripe time to do that. As Jezebel always would be.
Absolutely. Jezebel I remember reading Aaron Gloria Ryan covering these crazy bills that were coming out in like 2012, 2013.
Sure. Former guest of the show.
Oh, really? Okay, great.
I love Aaron.
That was a couple years after the Tea Party wave had swept in, and then all these states did redistricting and gerrymandered the crap out of everything. And that's when you first started seeing really wild abortion restrictions in violation of Roe v. Wade, because the states wanted to queue up a challenge to Roe. So, but yes, Jezebel has been writing about that forever. And you're right. It's that suite of brands had a voice, and that's the value of them, right? Jalopnik on cars, Kotaku on games, The Root on Black culture, like Gizmodo on tech. These sites, and Gawker.
The old Gawker and Valleywag, both of them,
yeah. People went to go, to the extent that people still go to these sites, it's because they want the voice. And Jim's idea of how to run a media business is just completely in conflict with why people go to those websites. I don't know if you saw recent reporting about him wanting to turn Kotaku into mostly guides-driven content.
I heard about that. I didn't read. I don't know where I heard about it.
No problem. So Kotaku does a lot of voicey coverage, like reviews of games and what they think are missing in character development in games and all this stuff, and also how the industry treats its workers. That's like a big part of Kotaku's coverage.
Which is classic. Classic because the industry works people like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's union campaigns in it. And I know from when I was there, hearing this conversation in like the union Slack, and then also people talking about this outside of that Jim didn't want, and Leah Goldman, deputy editorial director, did not want Kotaku writing about any labor actions like layoffs or unionizing drives or companies pushing back against it. They're like, no, our readers don't come to us for that. They want, they couldn't actually. What they want is the voicey pieces, but what Jim tried to do a couple weeks ago was say just guides, which is like tips, like here's how to beat this boss and find this, extra life and
the old like Nintendo magazine way of doing things. But I don't know this to be true, but I would imagine that people who are hardcore gamers actually do care about the industry.
They do.
Right?
And truly, the other thing too, the last few months of my time at Jezebel, they had in the kitchen a chart beat big board showing the top 20 stories across the network.
Yeah.
Kotaku was always in the top 5. Like one of their stories, and then they'd have other ones. Kotaku was one of the highest traffic driving sites in the portfolio, and yet you would hear things like Jim allegedly firing the former EIC Patricia Hernandez because they didn't meet traffic rules. And I know you had this conversation with Lauren about what the traffic rules. So the one thing I'll add to that conversation is, I know this from talking to her, and then also the some other former EICs. They would take whatever you had done the previous year and then add some number to it. So it was, it wasn't a small number. It would be like 10%, 25%.
And Lauren said that like when she was there, like Jezebel even hit those numbers.
One quarter Jezebel hit the numbers. But for that to happen when Jim wasn't letting anyone backfill on Jezebel and other sites too, that wasn't just a Jezebel problem. That was, that felt like a huge victory. And then he turned around and acted like, oh, well, no, you can't actually have other backfills because of other reasons that he would like make up.
How much insight do you have from that time into like, why is there a war on the people who are actually creating the content and one would argue the revenue for these companies? Like what's the conflict there? What's the contract? What's going on?
So I think a lot of it has to do with how Jim chose to run the company with like his chosen business model, which was programmatic advertising. Mm-hmm. Yes, they also sold direct. They tried to sell like sponsored packages and that kind of thing. But truly, I don't know if the ad sales team was understaffed or if they didn't know the brands well, but it seemed like they very rarely had sponsored packages. And the company was just looking a lot at programmatic ads, because I think one of the reasons why Jim was so antagonistic to the writers and the editors is because he didn't want anything that would get flagged and not be able to get ad revenue on, or he was so concerned about the lack of sponsorship revenue, like for, RFPs, like direct sales, that he didn't want advertisers to see something that would turn them off.
Oh, they might get spooked because you guys are having a real conversation about a controversial issue that people actually want to read about.
Yes. But it's really dumb. I think we've seen in recent years, this is the concept of like brand safety. I mean, people are reading this stuff. Some of these stories are like the highest traffic things that websites like Jezebel will publish, or even at Vice. This was an issue at Vice too. Some people, 404 Media is really cool. They were former staffers of Motherboard who quit and started their own thing.
Yeah.
And they have written a lot about brand safety. But I know at Vice as well is like, in 2020, writing about things like Black Lives Matter protests, like a lot of that would be marked unsafe and there would be no monetization on it. It's like, that's the stuff everyone's reading.
So much traffic. Yeah.
So much traffic. And it's, it's not going to be right for every advertiser, but certainly there's progressive advertisers who would be fine to be next. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
what's funny is you look at that and you look at the amount of advertisers that leave like Fox News for all the crazy fat ass shit that goes on over there.
Yeah.
It's like maybe the advertisers want to be more associated with the more, I don't want, maybe progressive is the wrong word there, but like at least the more timely conversations.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing too, I think, given that the sites have such the GeoMedia former Gawker sites have such like a specific voice, it feels to me that Jim should have implemented paywalls across all of the sites and monetize the audience that way. You have dedicated readership who come for a very specific thing. It's not like Google search is sending huge amounts of referral traffic. It's like people love the sites like that. That's an there's a word for it, enthusiast audience. That's an enthusiast audience. And those are like the exactly kind of people that would be willing to pay. And I'm not saying like pay, put everything behind a paywall. Like other places have meters. It's, you get however many a month.
I think it's also about community. I mean, the one thing I loved about the old Gawker world was how much it was about the community and not
the
just and the levels and
I don't even remember the level.
Oh yeah, there were different levels and basically you would be like, if you were level X, the person who was level Y below you still had like some sort of control over that and you could rise up. It was actually a really wonderful system to show that you care about the people who are being a part of this every day. And maybe the new way of doing that is by charging for community, right? Like charging access to the writers and the editors, and to see what's going on when there's a Supreme Court hearing about abortion or whatever. I mean, I know like Crooked Media does that, which Aaron's a part of, you know, like, and I think it's
right. They have a Discord channel now.
Yeah.
Yes. And so new Jezebel, Paystone Jezebel is doing some of that now too. I told you there's a subscriber.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
There's a subscriber option and they have a Discord and she wants to plan on doing live events. But the one thing I have to mention here is that GeoMedia sites, some of them used to have podcasts that's another revenue stream. Yeah. And Jim shut them all down. So it's just like he was doubling and tripling down on these strategies from, 2005, 2010, like let's crank out a whole bunch of content. Let's try to game the SEO machine. And also, AI came out. We have to try to implement this. Even though Google was like downranking.
Remember,
AI
I forgot
content.
about when. Sorry,
this is an audio medium, but I just rolled my eyes so hard when Dan said I forgot about that.
That they did like the I don't want to say it's the first, but the first big like AI generated article that was just a catastrophe.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, so IO9 is a sub brand of Gizmodo, and they do like some gaming stuff. It's separate from like Kotaku, but whatever and Space, and I'm gonna get this wrong, but basically IO9 had an article that was all the Star Wars movies in order, and it got it wrong. It had like years in parentheses after each of the movies, and it got it wrong. So it's just the company said that they were doing this as a test because they wanted to see if this could ease some busy work on the writers, do some lists that the SEO people would want us to do, and writers might be like,
apparently they were unaware of a strike that was about to happen in the union, the writers,
the screenwriters, mostly over AI. Yeah. It's just, it's so frustrating because those brands had so much potential. I mean, granted, I think any media company owned by private equity is going to be frustrating because they just want increasing returns every year and they want to, like squeeze as much blood from the stone as possible.
They do, but that's also because they don't understand media.
Well, that too.
I mean, like, there are many different models to make money in media, as you know, and if you just depend on programmatic advertising, you're probably, unless you're a one person band, like, you're probably not going to do well,
Yeah.
And so the lack of strategy always bothers me because I always think about the fact that like, if you have a really good sense of your audience, you can figure it out.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to say, I don't know if this is controversial to say, but like, I think there's this trend in people who have been in media for a long time, older people who have been in media for a long time, who kind of like maybe had an idea that the internet was going to be something before a lot of people accepted that.
which is still like well into the early 2000s. Like you
Yes.
mentioned, but Jim probably being one of them. There
Well,
are a few
I know
others.
someone else who's, I'll let you finish, but I have a story for you.
I look forward to that.
Yeah.
I know a couple of these guys as well, and they're all guys, by the way. Like, let's be clear.
Because that's who was in charge back then.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And they did one good thing. Well, they did one thing that was successful. It had been riding the coattails of that thing, whatever it might be, for that individual company for 20 years.
Yeah.
And the ego that goes with having done that thing that was successful, and never mind the misogyny and all the, not never mind it, but but
Leaving aside.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think about these guys and how like they ride these egos and they treat people like garbage, and it ruins media for a lot of the people who are so talented at it. And I worry about media for that reason, because you're going to lose people who could have been creating such amazing content,
Right. There will be people who get laid off or quit out of frustration and like leave media and journalism altogether. That's, not great. But when you're talking about mostly men who made smart choices back in, the early 2000s, that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, Jim was at Forbes, and I believe he launched the Contributor Network, which was the unpaid blogging network. And they just created so many articles, and he believes that was like...
That was his win. That was his early win.
Yeah, that was his early win. But then also, speaking of other early wins, I mean, after all the Deadspin stuff, they had an editorial director who quit, and then that position was vacant for a really long time. And we were sitting there thinking, oh, they're never going to fill this. They're just going to just ignore it, whatever. They did eventually hire somebody for that role. I believe they started in early, like January 2023, and it was Merrill Brown, who, yes, you may be familiar with. And Merrill was, I believe, the first editor-in-chief of MSNBC.
He was, yes.
.com or
.com.
Yes,
yeah.
.com.
Yeah.
So like that, and that was in the early 2000s, and that was, a success story, and they were like maybe new to the game, but it's just so interesting to hear Merrill's then rationalization to the press, and then people in the company, when we would press them on it, on using AI, because he would turn it around and say, well, this is the next big thing, and we got to get in on it. Like, this is the equivalent to now of the internet to newspapers. And it's like, we don't know that yet. And also, I, to this day, do not know if that was his true belief or if he was just saying that to keep his job.
I actually confronted Merrill about that.
Okay.
Because I'm a really blunt person sometimes, and I don't put up a lot of bullshit when it comes to media stuff. And I think, that I thought that AI situation was so embarrassing for him, for Geo, for any media company.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing, not just because of how wrong they got a silly story, but how disrespectful it is to people who actually work on this stuff day to day and create, And I said to him, like, what do you think? He goes, yeah, it wasn't my idea. And
it wasn't his idea. So was he just conjuring that excuse to like appease Jim?
I think he was towing the company line.
Yeah.
And I'm not defending that, by the way. I certainly am not. But I think that anyone who got in Jim's way, and I'm not going to be libelous here because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I think it sounded like anytime anyone got in his way, you're basically fucked.
And then, Laura Bassett, the former EIC, had quit in August, and they were trying to sell Jezebel, or they claim they were trying to sell Jezebel. I truly wonder how hard they tried.
Yeah.
Then 2 days after whatever spat happened with Merrill, he folded Jezebel, and then laid off other people on the same day. It wasn't just That's another thing that people, that like some of my former colleagues, like on Gizmodo, lost their jobs, and I think on Kotaku, and maybe one Deadspin person before they then finally nailed the coffin lid shut on Deadspin. That's a horrible thing that they did.
Yeah,
selling it to some company that allegedly works in casino, like gambling referrals.
Yeah, that's not journalism.
No.
Yeah.
And it's just like, why would you even sell to them?
I think it's a lack of respect for what media really is. A lack of respect for journalism. Sorry.
Yeah.
And the thing that people, I think, often forget about these sites like Jezebel or Deadspin or Kotaku, any of them, like, there is really good journalism going on there. Yeah. I felt the same way about a lot of Vice's stuff, even though there's also other sides of Vice that were kind of fun, whatever, but that's okay. Let's talk about like the journalism side of things, because we don't have to just be negative. I
could be negative all day.
Believe me, I understand. But I'm genuinely curious as someone who, for you as someone who covers, women's rights and abortion in particular, post 2022, here actually like today, here we are, in a very challenging world. What's your approach today as you write and think about stories and what to cover or how to cover women's rights and abortion in particular? Like what to get the right message across to people or whatever the right message might be.
Yeah. Well, it certainly depends on where I'm pitching the story. I mean, I know Jezebel really well, having worked there for 2 years on staff and now been freelancing for them for a couple months. So I feel like I know what a Jezebel reader wants. And I think readers at other outlets also want that. It might just be a challenge of getting the editor to improve the story. But I think for me, it's trying to cut through the noise and speak to people quite directly about what activists and politicians might say, contrast that with what they've done. It was quite interesting around the Alabama IVF decision. There were all these people saying, that was in Alabama, that was a state level Supreme Court thing. But then there were all these people in Congress claiming, oh, we support IVF. It's like, okay, how many of you sponsored the Life at Conception Act, which conception is an anti-abortion term. I call it fertilization. If life begins at fertilization when a sperm fertilizes an egg, that would outlaw IVF as it's currently practiced. I mean, it would basically make it completely unable to practice. And it could also outlaw certain types of birth control based on how anti-abortion people think they work. It's not actually how they work, but that has never stopped them, whatever. So it's like putting those things together, here's what you say and here's what you've done.
Same thing happened in Arizona.
Oh, yes. Well, Carrie Lake is trying to say I don't like this 1864 ban when 2 years ago when she was running for governor. And before Republicans got their asses kicked in that election, she was like, yeah, 1864 ban, woo. And then she lost. And so many other people lost, like Herschel Walker and Doug Mastriano. I mean, he's running for governor.
And our buddy, Dr. Oz.
Oh my God, I'm from Pennsylvania. Dr. Oz lost. And he wasn't even the most hard line on abortion, and he still lost.
Yeah. But that's the question I have is you have all these people who is right-wing people who are trying to backpedal because because they're losing on an issue that was so important to them that they were so upfront about beforehand. And now they're backtracking and lying and whatever. I imagine part of your job as a journalist is to make sure people know that these guys are hypocrites.
Absolutely. I think about that a lot. And one of the main things speaking of, this touches on hypocrisy, but then also touches on what to cover and what to highlight. I mean, I write a lot about the Comstock Act now, there's a law passed
which no one knew about, 3 months ago, 4 months ago?
Yes. Well, some people myself.
No, I know.
No, but also truly the most important person who knew about the Comstock Act before all of us is an anti-abortion lawyer who practices in Texas named Jonathan Mitchell. He is the same lawyer who worked with a state lawmaker to write the Texas bounty hunter abortion ban that went into effect 9 months before the Supreme Court killed Roe. That was September 2021. Right. That was 6 weeks before I started Jezebel. That law passed and got signed by Governor Greg Abbott in May. And then the same week, the Supreme Court took up the Dobbs case. And, then September 1st, the Supreme Court let it take effect. So Jonathan Mitchell has known about Comstock forever. And he even gave an interview to Amy Littlefield at The Nation, saying that he knew about Comstock before Dobbs. He just wanted to keep it under his hat. I mean, he didn't say keep it under my hat. He just said, he didn't want that to be injected into the conversation of what does it mean for the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Right. Yeah.
But now
he has a plan, of course.
He has a plan. He's the one going around with this other activist based in Texas named Mark Lee Dixon. He's a former youth pastor, and they're trying to pass and have been successful in passing ordinances at the city level, sometimes at the county level, saying that these places are quote unquote sanctuary cities for the unborn. Yes, they are using the language of immigration to talk about.
But they also say they hate sanctuary cities. So
of course,
it's weird.
They're trying to rebrand that. But basically, in that language, it cites the Comstock Act, and of course they're cowards, so they just cite it by statute number. They say 18 USC 1461. They don't write Comstock Act because they don't want anyone to just easily be able to control F.
Which is what Carrie Lake did with the Arizona law.
She did that?
When she did the interview in 2022, she mentions whatever it was, AS, whatever it was. She mentions the exact number,
Okay.
which is why it's so blatantly.
It's so well, and then Justice Sam Alito did that in oral arguments in the abortion pill case like 2-3 weeks ago. He asked the government's lawyer, like, "Hey, well, doesn't this conflict with 18 U.S.C. 1461?" And she just shot back, "Oh, you mean the Comstock Act?" Okay. So Mitchell and Dixon are running around trying to say that all these like cities and counties can't have abortion clinics in them because Comstock says that you can't have any shipments of supplies to clinics.
Yeah.
It's wild stuff. And they are actually like trying to tee up challenges, not just in red states like Texas, but also they passed one of these ordinances in New Mexico, which has protections for abortion. And I think that New Mexico is in a judicial circuit. This is another thing you have to think about, a judicial circuit that is has a different makeup. So it's possible they could lose the case in New Mexico, but win the case based out of Texas, which goes up through the Fifth Circuit, which is like nuts. I don't know if you've heard. Fifth Circuit is Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. They're the ones who upheld. They didn't block the Texas bounty hunter ban, and they have also upheld some other things. It's like a lot of cases land in the Supreme Court's lap because the Fifth Circuit's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. So, but the strategy is if you get one appeals court saying, sure, we agree with you, and then you get a more like democratic appeals court saying we disagree with you, that creates what's known as a circuit split. These are different circuit court of appeals, and the Supreme Court has to take the case then.
Oh, right, because they have to
resolve it.
Right.
So like this is the strategy, and Jonathan, So I read about the Comstock Act, and trying to hit everyone over the head with it about how Congress does not need to pass a ban on abortion at whatever it would be, whatever number Trump decides he likes,
right. 15, 16, whatever he feels is just a number that really,
They don't have to do that in order to make things absolute chaos in the country. And it could start with just banning the shipments of mifepristone, the first drug in the medication abortion protocol.
Right.
Or if they want to get really aggressive, then they could do you can't ship anything to abortion clinics, including like, not speculums because they'll be used for other things, but you could argue. I mean, other supplies like vacuum aspirators or these things called like cannula, these like supplies that are used in procedural abortion. Some activists want Trump to enforce it that strongly. So I think that anytime we see these like push alerts, I was getting push alerts last week or whenever it was about Trump says this, Trump says he doesn't support a national ban. It's like, what he says doesn't matter. It's what he's going to do and who he's going to appoint to these positions.
He says whatever comes. The last person said to him, he'll just repeat that.
Yes. Yeah. He definitely has like recency bias or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But then also, I think that the problem remains that because it's like the Carrie Lake problem, because people have been losing, and Trump has referenced that in his recent things, like we have to win elections. I understand, he said that in his little video on Truth Social, and he said that in the lead up to his statement, you have to follow your heart, but we have to win elections. He's basically signaling to people, shut up. Let me win, help me win.
Right.
And then,
then we can do whatever
we want. So I think, and that's a piece I wrote for Jezebel and we refer to it, and Lauren let me, the Comstock gaslighting era. We're in the era of gaslighting about the Comstock Act.
That's crazy. Well, let me ask you this. So, because I could literally talk about this all day and I would be happy to, not happy to, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's easy to go down that rabbit hole. But I'm curious, like, where this all comes from. I mean, I understand from like as a woman, as a journalist, but I think about Susan growing up.
How did I get here? Yeah.
Yeah, like you grew up in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
In Allentown.
Yes.
Okay, so you're growing up in Allentown. Are you thinking when you're a kid like journalism? That's my thing. That's what I got to do. No, it's not. Was news a part of like the daily ritual,
I mean, I grew up watching the local news broadcast. My parents did have that on like every night at like 10 or 11. And I pretty regularly watch the news. Yeah.
But it wasn't like the thing that you gravitated towards. What was the dream as you're growing up?
It changed. I feel like everyone goes through like different changes. First I wanted to be a vet, and then I was like, no, I can't put animals down. And then I watched the premiere of ER back in 1998 or whenever it was first on. I was like, I want to be an ER doctor. I was like, no, actually, I don't want to do that either. And then in middle school, I really wanted to be a fashion designer.
By the way, that's already a right turn. Just like, all right, medical and fashion.
Sure, yeah, right, doctor. Yeah. I guess that is like a creative field. And my mom made jewelry for a while, so she was creative, and my dad was an engineer. So like,
there's a logic and creative piece to this.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I went to school and majored in English, and which was funny because my dad is an engineer, my brother is an engineer, and it was always so growing up, the joke was always like, oh, English major, like English major is the degree for, hey, you want fries with that? Like that was what my dad,
I can relate to that.
Yeah. Okay. So I went to the University of Delaware, and they did not have a journalism major, and they at the time did not even have a journalism minor. Mm-hmm. It was when you did English or two other majors, you could have a concentration. It would either be communications, journalism, or like science and technical writing. And I chose journalism. And then I worked at the newspaper first as a work study job, which was really cute. I was like selling classified ads, like over the phone, in our little print college newspaper. And then I took the classes and eventually like started working on the paper. But even then, I don't know if that's what I thought I would do, but as a career, but I knew I wanted to be in New York.
Okay. I
always loved New York. And I started out in health and fitness magazines.
Is this at Rodale or before?
Yes, it was at Rodale. Yeah. And do you know Rodale-ish? Or?
I know the media company. I know, I mean, from years ago, and I know like
it doesn't exist anymore.
They had like Runner's World.
That's my first job.
So I knew you worked at it. Okay. I didn't just randomly pull that one out. Okay. But I mean, coming to New York and working in journalism, even like entry level, is not the easiest thing to do. Both from a obviously salary standpoint, but also it's a tough industry to break into, I think. So I always like want to be clear with people who listen to the show that like, when you say I've always wanted to live in New York and I want to be in journalism, like that's a dream that's a great dream. I mean, I shared that dream as well.
Oh yeah.
But how did you make it happen?
Okay. I think one of the things that helped me is that I didn't have my first job in New York. My first job was at Runner's World in Pennsylvania. Rodale was founded in Emmaus, and after a long time, they opened a New York office. And I worked at that company for 4 years until I moved to New York. And even then the salary was like disgustingly low. But I think,
did you live at home, or did you live?
I lived at home for part of it. And then I moved into an apartment in Bethlehem, which is really cute. So some of what worked for me is, living at home part of the time. And then when I did move to New York, I still had roommates. I had 2. I know people who have moved to New York to chase their dream, and they'll have like 4.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And they'll live like so far out. I lived on the Upper East Side with 2 roommates. It was still like, my room was small. But that's how I made that work. But
what was the job?
Well, I was like first I was an intern at Runner's World, and they did paid internships, which was nice.
They did paid internships.
Yeah, it was like $10 an hour, but still, it was paid.
Yeah, sure.
And then there was assistant editor, associate editor, like online editor, whatever. And then I became just a web editor at Women's Health magazine, which still exists.
So over 4 years there, I mean, that seems like a great progression.
Yes.
Like, what were you learning as you went through this? Like how
was I learning?
Yeah, as like, because you had mentioned earlier that a lot of the work you did freelancing before was editing. So it sounds like you.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you, as you rise to the ranks at Rodale, what other things you're taking away, and how do you find the opportunities to rise up?
Yeah. Well, I would say I was learning mostly from my colleagues. Like, you could tell who was good at their job and who was maybe struggling a little bit, or at how you like to be edited. Because even when you're an editor, you're still writing little things. And I was doing more interviewing too. You're writing like the contributors page. Literally, that was one of my jobs as a low-level magazine staffer. It's like we have these people who are getting paid $2 a word to write 5,000-word features, and I interview them and write a little blurb about the story and all the stuff. So
hey, that's good. That's a good start.
It's a good start, yeah. And then eventually came like, I even at the time knew that the web was going to be a bigger thing, and I liked having more instantaneous feedback on things like traffic and comments and whatever. So I would then also be doing things like covering the New York City Marathon, covering the Boston Marathon, which I've done in the past.
Which was yesterday.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
It was so interesting. I was learning some things about how magazines are run, and then also how I really appreciate unions now, because that was before, this wave of unionization came through. And I just remember one year being told by my editor-in-chief, like, oh, you did so amazing last year. And, I have like this 2% pool to spread around to people. And like, because you did really well, we're going to give you like a 2% raise. But then also that meant other people wouldn't be getting raises because he had 2% of his total payroll,
Right.
and he could spend money.
You kind of ended up in the lucky place of being one of those people, but also knowing your colleagues
exactly. Well, and then the next year when it didn't happen, it's like, yeah, or
right.
they would cut those things, and it's just, learned some interesting stuff. Actually, it was really cool to work with. There was a former Boston Marathon winner, Amby Burfoot. I don't know. He's like famous in the running world. He won Boston once, but he was like a big deal in like the 60s. And he had been on staff at Runner's World forever. And I was helping him work on a feature about a marathoner who died in Central Park during the marathon trials. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, it was 2007. And he needed help. And they, instead of having like pay a free, I mean, they had me. I think I was even the intern at that time. It was just really cool to like see his process and sit down with him and help him with like transcription. That's the other thing too. Honestly, transcribing interviews taught me some things about interviewing and at other jobs that I've had. Like this is now jumping ahead way in the future, but I worked with Jessica Roy at The Cut, who's now an author and freelance, but she was most recently she was like the digital director of Elle. Mm-hmm. But when I met her, she was working at The Cut, and she had come from New York Mag Intelligencer, and she was doing like quick stuff. And you would hear her on the phone, like asking for comment or, saying like, oh, just, to clarify, blah, blah, blah. Is this what you mean? And then hearing like her sign off question. I think I learned the most by like observing it. So I think it also helps. It really does help when you've been on both ends, because when you're a freelancer and you see how certain editors like treat your work, or, a staff writer, staff reporter, I think that makes you a more empathetic editor. Because what it's like to be on the receiving end of a potentially harsh edit. I think really good editors are helpful at finding, like, say the draft is really, really rough. They're good at finding the best part of it and saying, I love this. We want to make it more about that. I have some ideas about how to, move some things around to emphasize your point, and it'll be stronger if we do this, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But I mean, there are also those are like the web editors I've worked with. Back when I worked on print magazines, there would be people running around with like red pens being like, I hate this. Or, yes. So, and it can be really devastating if you see you're doing in the margins on a printed out piece of paper. That's when they would circulate at Runner's World and Women's Health, like circulate things in folders. Now it's in InDesign, and you can like just, someone gets an email and they open up the file on their computer. But if you had this much space in the margin, I'm showing like an inch or two, and people might be writing like a harsh little note that can really sting.
But I think the other side of this, though, is editors who don't do enough for you.
Well, I've encountered that too. There was one story recently, not at Jezebel, because, Lauren and I have a good working relationship, but a freelance story where someone edited something and I was like, I feel like I'm naked. Like the story's about to go out. There were some things that got changed, but I was like, are you sure it's good to go? I mean, I think I file really pretty good, clean drafts, but sometimes a lack of changes can make me as a writer feel insecure. Like, wait, are you sure?
Right. Because look, we're all, let's say baseline, we all have talent at writing. So, but none of us are perfect.
Right.
And I write something and someone comes back with no edits. I'm like, or like a couple edits. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way it's that good.
Right.
Because I'm not that good at writing. Yeah. And I've had that happen, and I've been like, I guess I better look at this my own self better, because I'm not getting what I need.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. But I don't know like how often that happens.
Yeah. I don't know. And I don't know if that's just this editor's style or what, but it can be nerve-wracking to go in working with different people, and I'm on my best behavior in the Google comments with people I don't know, whereas an editor that I'm really, we're like making jokes in Slack.
Of course, yeah.
So,
all right. So what I want to try to figure out now is, so you go from Rodale, was it to health.com?
Well, I did that too. So I went, from Women's Health, I went to health.com.
Right. Was that part of Rodale? Or was it different?
No, that was Time Inc.
Time Inc. Right. That's what I thought.
Also doesn't exist anymore.
That's so true. So many media companies.
I know.
Little time.
But Health still exists as a website. I don't think they publish the magazine anymore, but maybe Meredith bought it, because Meredith bought a bunch of the old Time Inc. property. Yeah. And that was a good learning experience. I had an editor there who worked at Reuters previously, and then also worked at Health Day, which is this like content syndication. They just cover a lot of health stuff. And she taught me some really good stuff about reading studies and how to get information on health things from like the CDC. That was cool. At this point, I was like thinking about what I wanted to do next, and a job opened at The Cut, a writing job. And I was like, well, I have to apply for this. I love The Cut. It was my favorite website.
Yeah, it's great. Great site. And is this where you kind of start gravitating to I know you, like, when you're writing for a publication, you tend to have to like
the voice.
Write to the voice.
Yeah.
But in terms of gravitating to the things you want to be covering.
Yes.
Is that?
Well, it was both. So The Cut obviously had a very distinct point of view and still does.
Yeah.
But then it's based on the timing of when I was there. I started that job in May 2015.
Okay.
Like a month later, Trump comes down the golden escalator.
I remember very well.
And then, so I was writing things about, probably for the first time, writing things about abortion. I had covered birth control and stuff at Health and Women's Health, but they didn't cover abortion. Health magazine was like, we are not touching it.
Yeah, they're not political.
Yeah. Which this stuff shouldn't be political, but it unfortunately is. Yeah. But yes, The Cut covered politics, next to their fashion and next to their health.
That's what I always liked about The Cut. Is that there's a point of view. I loved writing a health magazine. Don't get me wrong, it was great. It was fun. I got to do some really fun articles, but there was no like editorial voice in that. And the thing about The Cut, I mean, a lot of New York Mag is like this too. It's not just.
Yes, I love New York Mag.
Yeah, and there's something really wonderful about. To me, it's like the raw version of the New Yorker, and I mean that as a compliment.
Okay.
Meaning like New Yorker is great.
Yeah.
And I love it, but I don't often read a New Yorker article to like, well, that was edgy.
Yeah.
Great journalism.
Oh, for sure.
Amazing journalism, but like, there's something about New York Mag that reminds me a bit of Gawker, but without the Gawker. Yeah. It's the original Gawker, maybe.
That was actually, New York Mag was one of the first, I subscribed to that when I moved to New York. I was like, oh, wow. I live here, I need this. And then also actually one cool thing about working at Runner's World, I'm taking a slight detour, is the editor-in-chief at the time, David Willey, was like an ASME judge, American Society magazine editors. So I would like help him a little bit with that when I was an assistant editor. And so I was seeing like this stuff, and New York Magazine was winning like every year for either features or general excellence or whatever. And I was just like, I'm obsessed with this place now. New York Mag.
And then you got there.
And then I got there, yes. Yeah. So, right. So I started May 2015. And then that was, I think, no, the primaries weren't over yet, obviously. So it was like there throughout the primaries. And then, 2016, I was there when Trump won the election. That was bad. I
don't think that was good for anyone.
No, but it was especially being at a site like The Cut.
Oh, no, of course. Yeah.
No, it was not good for anyone. But
I mean specifically in the journalism world of New York City, I can't think of many places where people were like,
New York Post.
Can't wait to write. Yeah. The Post and maybe the Wall Street Journal.
Which are both owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
Although, as Lauren points out, the staffers are not necessarily holding the same views as the people who own the title. Whatever.
Sure.
Okay, that's a side note. But so I came from that health background and then was working on politics of like birth control, pregnancy, abortion, and I think that is something that I'd bring to the work I do today. That's even a little different. Like, thinking about how those two things intersect. Like, this isn't just politics to me. This is like people's bodies and lives. And like, that's the thing coming from these like, health and fitness publications and knowing how deadly pregnancy is and the outcomes for people. So like working at The Cut at the time that I was working there too, that also like radicalized me.
It got you. Do you feel like it pushed you into the better reporter? I don't want to say better, but the more intense maybe journalist you might be today?
I don't even know that I was doing like real reporting then.
No, really?
To be honest with you. Like I would do, let me take it back. I would interview experts for stories, but I wasn't like breaking news on my own or anything. And people have different definitions of what a reporter is, but like, I also don't think that I was really doing like stuff that I felt was super impactful until I was some of the stuff I was doing at Vice. And then honestly, when I was freelance after Vice.
Well, yeah, I do want to get to Vice because I do think Vice is a fascinating company to me for so many reasons. But like, before we move on to this, is there anything else or what made you move from The Cut to Vice?
Love The Cut. It was sometimes challenging because I was their first dedicated health hire and they didn't have editors who had experience editing that kind of content.
Yeah.
So it was sometimes challenging in terms of like, we want to put this headline on your health story. And I'm like, that's not what the story says. I mean, I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but it was like,
It's new for everyone.
It's new for everyone. And I had like multiple different managers. And I also think that, I don't think the day-to-day management of the site was working for someone on my beat. It was totally like, what's the word? It was totally like practiced and like easy for people writing about fashion and celebrity and probably politics. But I think like the stuff I was doing, there wasn't like a well-worn path for that yet.
And coming from a place that, again, I know we don't want this to be political, but it is, as someone who's kind of new to that beat and in a place that beat is new to also, how do you kind of approach how you cover it? Like, how do you decide, and how do you teach yourself how to cover that? It's probably a better way of asking it, because I imagine like, a lot about it because you are a well-informed person, but now you have to talk about it and report on it. And when I say report, I mean, look, if you're a journalist, you talk to people. I'm not saying you're going out and sleuthing,
right.
Maybe you are, but there is something to be said for like, you got to figure out how to do this. And that is a challenge. Yeah. I imagine.
Yeah. Well, and I think hopefully some of this happened in the hiring process because they have you write like a memo.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Some places have you do an edit test. Some places call it an edit memo, whatever. And so I think that's early on in the process, like maybe before the second interview. And so and they ask you for ideas and franchises that you would, pitch that you would want to do at the cut if you were on staff. And so then if the editor-in-chief or whoever's hiring likes your ideas, then you could attempt to execute some of them, that kind of thing. So it's like it's a learning process. Like, do they like any of that stuff, or am I going to show up and have me do completely different stuff?
Right.
But it was definitely fun to use a brand voice for the first time, because the other places I worked at were just very like up and down, like upbeat, positive, you can do it, whatever. And now it's just like, these like all the stories need a kicker. They need like a joke at the end, but not too many jokes.
Right.
And they need to be like smart and so that was a cool experience.
So then you go to Vice, which, I mean, not known for its subtlety, putting it mildly, like, which seems like actually for you, like, it seems like a good natural progression.
Well, the thing that was attractive to me about the job at Vice was that it wasn't at Vice, air quotes, proper. It was at a health brand called Tonic, which they folded after like 2 years of my being there, whatever. But they had all these verticals at the time. Right. They had Munchies, they had Noisy, which was music. They had Vice Sports, that didn't have a cutesy name, but like Vice Sports was really cool.
Oh yeah, their reporting was really good.
Yeah. So Tonic was supposed to be the no bullshit health stuff. It was going to be like, stop swigging apple cider vinegar. It's not going to do anything for you. Because that was kind of where I got by the end. Like, a lot of these health publications were selling bullshit to people, and I was like so over it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it's not just like the influencer of it all. We would cover like influencers saying this. Is this real? Is it not real? Whatever. I mean, people are out to make money in a lot of that. And then it's so interesting to think about it now, actually, because some of these influencers that are pushing for natural stuff, they like are telling people that birth control is bad for them. And it's like, you are doing the Republicans' work for them by getting people to think that birth control is like bad for you and you shouldn't be on it. And like, that's an anti-abortion talking point. I'm like, that's an aside. But I think it was cool to be at a dedicated site of health people. It was the editor-in-chief was Kate Lowenstein, who used to also work at Health, but we did not overlap. And then it was a former editor from Men's Health and some other very cool people. It's a small team, but I was like, we did cool stuff. And it's funny because I'll see other people doing similar things. I was like, oh, that's like a Tonic.
But doesn't that like, I feel like this is where I wish there was more of this today. You know, like I know that there's a lot of bullshit around the influencer stuff and very contradicting messages on what's healthy, what's not. You know, you can read 10 studies to tell you 10 different things.
Exactly.
But when it comes to like covering health issues, which it sounds like you move more into health issues than just the kind of science of everything, which is important too.
Yes.
What from your point of view, like, where is the good stuff happening right now beyond just specifically around this, like around women's health issues, like you know, that, and how do we get it to reach, do you think?
I got excited because I remembered who I think does a really good job of health content now, for women specifically, but also I think one of the reasons they're good at this is it's not just for women. They're also doing like they're doing stuff on like if you're a parent of a trans child, or, you know, like you're non-binary and trying to get an abortion, that kind of is Self magazine, which is just online now, but I think Self does a really great job. And two of the editors at Self used to work at Vice. So I kind of think like on their lifestyle desk. Ooh, sorry. Not doing like, you know, the news extremism or like how to make a bong out of your backpack or whatever. But, you know,
also important. Very important.
Yeah, I think that I think Self does a really good job.
That's actually good to hear, because I've never thought of them as like in that light.
Yeah.
But that's cool.
Well, it is interesting too, because look, I haven't been at those magazines since like 2015. And I think that they've changed a lot because body positivity movement has taken off, which is really helpful. And also like body neutrality, right? There's that aspect of it too. Like not everyone has to be like, yes, I'm amazing and I look great. You can just be like, this is the sack of bones I got. Here I am. Like, what are you gonna do? Well, because so I think the content that some of these publications would publish in the past would never get greenlit today. So I think that they've all like matured and evolved with the time. Yeah.
Thinking about these things that we talk about and not thinking about reproductive rights, but what do you think about the coverage of things like Ozempic and other?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I have some thoughts, but I don't think that they're worthwhile me sharing because I'm not a scientist in any way.
It's interesting. I think The Cut has done some good stuff on Ozempic, like first person essay type stuff and reported pieces. I'm sure Self has done like some good expert based stories on Ozempic, but something that hit me recently from The Cut was how it was a story about how doctors are pushing this on people increasingly. I think the headline was literally called "The Ozempic Pushers" or something like that. And look, I think these drugs can be really helpful for people who have like diabetes and have tried other things and it hasn't worked for them. But I think that I get nervous when there's like drug shortages because we have celebrities who are like, give me that.
Yeah.
And then people who actually need it can't get it. Or I also worry about how we don't know about the long-term effects of these drugs on people's bodies yet because they're so new. And I sound like an anti-vaxxer saying that, but I
actually share your point of view on it because I everything about that because people who are at risk for diabetes or have I do worry about if you don't stay active, if you're not and you're just taking it to suppress the appetite, all of a sudden I think about like muscle atrophy and and bone
you gotta work
density.
out. And then also if you stop taking it,
and if you stop,
it'll just come back.
Yeah.
So I think also the anecdote that really hit me from The Cut story was there was a woman who like self-identified herself. There was a woman who self-identified as fat and said she went to her gynecologist because she was having irregular periods and she wanted to get pregnant. And the doctor was like, oh, you should take Ozempic. And she was like, I'm not here to talk about my weight. I'm here to talk about my periods. But like, there are some, and yes, they are connected. If and when people lose weight, it can regulate your menstrual cycle and make you ovulate more regularly. But I feel like there is a lot of fat phobia in medicine and in our society in general. Like I have internalized fat phobia. Like I think everyone does. So it's so hard to separate those things. And I think that it's really wild to hear some of the stories that are coming out now. But actually, you asked about Ozempic. I just wrote something for Jezebel about this because Mounjaro, which is another GLP-1 drug, specifically says on its label that you need to use that it could impact birth control pills because they go through your stomach and it slows gastric emptying and it might mean that you don't absorb as much of the pill as you need for it to prevent pregnancy, to prevent ovulation. So, because people have been saying that they're getting pregnant more off, like they didn't expect to get pregnant. Yeah, because they're on these drugs. That's really
interesting. I hadn't read that.
Yeah.
Send me that article if you don't mind. I'd love to read it.
Yeah, so that was in the context of like, I think about so many stories policy-wise and trend-wise, like Ozempic, and then also childcare costs, things like that. I think of that in the back of my head. I'm always like, abortion bans. And I'm,
Does it prevent you from pitching those stories?
No. What I'm saying is I'll frame it in that way then. So,
I see.
For that story on Jezebel, it was like, okay, if more people are getting pregnant, we have 14 states that are banning abortion right now and more like almost totally banning abortion and then more that are banning it just slightly later in pregnancy. So like, what's going to happen to these people? Are they, these drugs might cause birth defects. Are you going to be able to get an abortion if you live in a state that has banned it and you were taking Ozempic? So
Probably
it's just,
not.
Yeah, probably not. Exactly.
Ugh. So fun. I'm just like, I don't want to I could keep talking about this, and I want to be cognizant of your time. But as I think about your, all the things you've been doing is you've kind of shaped your voice over the past, 10, 12 years, not to discount the before that, but really, as you've moved into women, specifically women's health, reproductive rights, and at places that are willing to take chances with voice.
Yeah.
What are you where do you see where you want to do next? Obviously you're freelancing, you have plenty of work, it sounds like, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But do you want to go back full time? Do you want to stay freelancing? Is there a dream thing you want to write about?
I would love to have a full-time job at some place that wants me to cover this stuff full time and isn't going to ask me to write 2 stories a day, you know?
So you have time to actually do the journalism and deep dives. Yeah.
Yes. I don't, it's funny because I feel like some people get asked this question, like, oh yeah, I have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. I'm like, I don't
believe in 5-year plans.
Okay,
so
good. That makes me feel better.
I've never had one. Don't have one now. I don't know what tomorrow is, honestly.
That makes me feel better. My parents, ever since I told them I wanted to be a fashion designer, they were like, no, you should write books. And I was like, I don't have an idea for a book. I don't have an idea for a novel. I don't. So
that's okay, by the way.
Yeah. Right. But I feel like everyone in New York has a novel. But what I'm saying is some people are sitting here and they're plotting, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have a book and I'm going to do this. I think I could see myself maybe hosting a reported podcast. That would be cool.
That's interesting.
I don't have an idea yet.
I think when it comes to those kind of things, they come to you eventually. I mean, I'm excited to see what comes next for you, and I want to read your stuff. Please let me know where you're writing things. Or do I follow you on social? Is that?
Well, we can fix that if not.
I will.
But,
I will. Cheers. Well, thank you for doing this.
Cheers.
It was great meeting you.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Story in a Bottle. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review for us in the iTunes store or wherever you listen. I'd like to thank our producers at 1459 Production Management and Charming Robots Eric Bowie for his continued production support.
And of course, I'd like to thank my guest, Susan Rinkunas, for graciously giving us her time.